Picture this: a time when the fate of kingdoms rested on the sheer ingenuity of minds that dared to rethink the art of war. The medieval battlefield wasn't just a stage for brute force. It was a proving ground for some of history's most revolutionary inventions, each one a testament to human creativity under pressure. From the moment the first crossbow bolt whistled through the air to the earth-shaking impact of a trebuchet's payload, these innovations didn't just shift the balance of power, they rewrote the rules of combat forever. And here's the thing: many of the breakthroughs born in the heat of medieval conflict still echo in the technologies we rely on today. That's the story we're about to unravel, a journey through 32 inventions that didn't just change battles, but shaped the course of history itself. What made these innovations so extraordinary? It wasn't just their destructive potential, it was the way they transformed every aspect of warfare. Take the humble stirrup, for example. Seemingly simple, yet it turned mounted knights into an unstoppable force, redefining cavalry tactics for centuries. Or consider the longbow, a weapon so powerful it could pierce armor at staggering distances, turning the tide of entire wars. These weren't just tools. They were game changers that forced armies to adapt or perish. And behind each one lies a story of trial, error, and moments of brilliance that would make even modern engineers pause in admiration. But this isn't just a tale of swords and siege engines. It's about the human spirit's relentless drive to innovate. Every invention we'll explore emerged from a need to solve a problem, whether it was breaching towering castle walls or outmaneuvering an enemy's defenses. And the best part, you'll soon discover how these medieval marvels laid the groundwork for everything from modern artillery to structural engineering. So, if you've ever wondered how the battlefields of the past influenced the world we live in today, you're in the right place. By the time we're done, you'll see the medieval era not as a dark age, but as a crucible of innovation, where every challenge sparked a solution that still resonates. Ready to begin? Let's step onto the battlefield and uncover the inventions that changed everything. The crossbow wasn't just a weapon, it was a revolution in a compact, deadly package. Imagine the shock of facing an army where even the most inexperienced soldier could loose a bolt capable of punching through armor with terrifying precision. Unlike the longbow, which demanded a lifetime of training to develop the strength and skill needed for effective use, the crossbow required minimal instruction. A peasant could be taught to load, aim, and fire in a matter of days, turning ordinary men into lethal threats on the battlefield. This accessibility shattered the old hierarchies of war, where only the elite could wield bows effectively. And suddenly, power wasn't just in the hands of the nobility. It was within reach of anyone with a steady hand and a will to fight. But the crossbow's real genius lay in its engineering. The combination of a sturdy stock, a powerful prod, and a mechanical trigger system allowed it to store immense energy, releasing it in a single, devastating shot. Historical records from battles and describe bolts flying with such force they could skewer multiple men in a row or embed themselves deep into wooden fortifications. And the psychological toll was just as brutal. The eerie silence before a volley, no war cries, no drawn-out creak of longbow strings, made the sudden, deadly rain of bolts even more unnerving. Armies that had stood firm against sword charges and cavalry often crumbled under the relentless, impersonal efficiency of crossbow fire. What's often overlooked is how this invention forced armies to adapt. The crossbow didn't just kill, it demanded new tactics, new armor, and new battlefield strategies. Plate armor thickened in response, shield walls became, and commanders began to prioritize neutralizing before they could unleash their deadly volleys. Even the design of castles evolved, with lower, thicker walls replacing towering but vulnerable fortifications to better withstand sustained bombardments. In many ways, the crossbow was the medieval equivalent of a disruptive technology. It didn't just change the rules of engagement, it forced everyone to play a whole new game. And perhaps most remarkably, its influence didn't fade with the Middle Ages. The principles behind its mechanism laid the groundwork for later innovations, from early firearms to modern tension-based weaponry, proving that some inventions don't just dominate their era, they echo through history. If the crossbow was the great equalizer, plate armor was the ultimate response, a masterpiece of medieval engineering that turned individual warriors into walking fortresses. Picture a knight clad head to toe in gleaming steel, sunlight glinting off polished surfaces as arrows simply bounce away like harmless rain. This wasn't just protection, it was a statement. The moment plate armor appeared on the battlefield, the dynamics of combat shifted forever. Unlike earlier, which could be pierced by a well-placed arrow or thrust, a properly crafted steel plate could withstand blows that would have felled lesser-armored fighters in an instant. And here's what's fascinating. The best suits weren't just slabs of metal. They were precision instruments, tailored to the wearer's body like a second skin. The secret to plate armor's success lay in its meticulous design. Artisans hammered sheets of steel into curved shapes, a technique that allowed arrows and sword strikes to glance off rather than penetrate. But the real breakthrough came with articulation, hinged joints at the elbows, knees, and fingers that gave knights surprising mobility. Contrary to popular myth, a well-fitted suit didn't weigh its wearer down like a lead coffin. At around 45 to 55 pounds, distributed evenly across the body, a trained knight could mount a horse, sprint short distances, and even perform somersaults if needed. Stories from tournaments describe combatants executing complex maneuvers with a fluidity that stunned onlookers, proving that plate armor was as much about agility as it was about brute defense. Yet its psychological impact might have been even more profound. The sight of a line of plate-armored knights advancing was enough to make entire infantry units falter. The armor's polished surfaces often bore intricate engravings or gilding, transforming each warrior into a shimmering, almost mythical figure on the battlefield. And when sunlight caught those surfaces just right, the blinding glare alone could disorient opponents. It's no wonder kings and nobles invested fortunes in these suits. They weren't just buying protection, they were purchasing an aura of invincibility. But plate armor's legacy extends far beyond intimidation. Its development pushed metallurgy to new heights, with craftsmen experimenting with tempering techniques to create steel that could resist early firearms. The same principles of deflection and weight distribution influenced everything from Renaissance-era body armor to modern ballistic vests. Even the articulated joints found in medieval suits inspired early mechanical limb designs, proving that the greatest inventions often serve purposes their creators never imagined. So the next time you see a knight's suit in a museum, remember, you're not just looking at a relic of war. You're seeing the birth of engineering concepts that still protect lives today. The English longbow didn't just bend wood, it bent history itself. Imagine standing on the muddy fields of, watching as thousands of arrows blot out the sky like a deadly storm. In an era when most battles were decided by brute force and armored cavalry, this slender weapon of yew and hemp rewrote the rules of war. What made it so extraordinary wasn't just its range or power, though with the ability to punch through plate armor at 250 yards, both were staggering, but the way it turned ordinary men into the most feared archers in Europe. Unlike the crossbow, which relied on mechanical advantage, the longbow demanded something far more personal: years of grueling training that reshaped the bodies of its wielders. Skeletons of medieval archers reveal telltale deformities: thickened left arms, twisted spines, proof of a lifetime spent mastering this relentless weapon. But the longbow's true brilliance lay in its simplicity. A well-crafted stave of yew, carefully dried and shaped, could store and release energy with terrifying efficiency. The secret was in the wood's natural properties. The heartwood resisted compression while the sapwood stretched, creating a perfect synergy of power and flexibility. And when paired with bodkin-tipped arrows, designed to pierce armor like a needle through cloth, even the most heavily armored knight became vulnerable. Historical accounts from battles like in Poitiers describe French cavalry charges faltering under hails of arrows, so dense they turned the ground into a forest of quivering shafts. At the longbow's rapid-fire capability, a skilled archer could loose 10 to 12 arrows a minute, turn the tide against an army 3 times its size, proving that precision and discipline could overwhelm sheer numbers. What's often overlooked is the cultural revolution the longbow sparked. English kings mandated longbow practice for all able-bodied men, creating a reservoir of deadly skill that could be called upon in times of war. Villages held weekly archery contests, and fathers drilled their sons from childhood, weaving the weapon into the very fabric of society. This wasn't just military training, it was a social equalizer. A peasant with a longbow could topple a noble knight, upending the medieval world's rigid hierarchies. The psychological impact was profound. French knights, raised to believe their armor and status made them invincible, found themselves helpless against waves of arrows fired by men they'd once considered beneath notice. Yet the longbow's legacy extends beyond its battlefield triumphs. Its dominance forced innovations in armor design, leading to thicker, more angled plate to deflect arrows. It influenced tactics, with commanders learning to deploy archers in staggered ranks to maintain continuous volleys. And when firearms eventually eclipsed it, the longbow left behind a lesson that still resonates. Sometimes, the most revolutionary inventions aren't the most complex, but the ones that harness human potential in unexpected ways. Today, when we see modern soldiers training with precision rifles or athletes pushing the limits of their bodies, we're witnessing the same principle that made the longbow legendary: the marriage of skill, technology, and sheer determination. The Trebuchet wasn't just a siege engine, it was medieval Europe's equivalent of a tactical nuclear weapon. Picture the scene: a fortress under siege, its defenders confident behind towering walls, when suddenly the ground trembles as workers assemble a monstrous wooden frame. The mere sight of those massive beams and dangling counterweights sent waves of dread through even the bravest soldiers. Because unlike earlier torsion catapults, which relied on twisted ropes for power, the trebuchet harnessed the relentless pull of gravity. A single release could send a boulder the weight of a full-grown horse soaring through the air with terrifying precision, smashing through stone like it was parchment. Historical records from sieges like Stirling Castle describe projectiles landing with such force they buried themselves several feet into the earth, leaving craters that demoralized defenders before the next volley even launched. What set the trebuchet apart was its ingenious use of counterweights. Engineers could adjust the weight box to fine-tune trajectory and distance, some models capable of flinging objects nearly a mile with pinpoint accuracy. The famous, built for King Edward I during the Scottish Wars of Independence, took 50 carpenters 3 months to construct, and when completed, its first shot demolished an entire curtain wall in one strike. But brute force was only half the story. Siege commanders often loaded trebuchets with more than just stones. Rotting animal carcasses, barrels of quicklime, even beehives became psychological weapons, hurled into besieged towns to spread disease, panic, or swarms of angry bees. At the Siege of Acre, defenders reportedly surrendered the moment they saw crusaders assembling a trebuchet, knowing resistance was futile against an engine that could outrange their own catapults by hundreds of yards. Yet the trebuchet's legacy goes beyond destruction. Its design principles, lever arms, counterbalances, and energy transfer, became foundational to later engineering. Renaissance inventors studied these machines when developing early crane systems, and even today, physics students recreate miniature trebuchets to understand mechanical advantage. There's a poetic symmetry to how this weapon of war ultimately contributed to peaceful construction techniques. Modern simulations show that a well-built trebuchet could hit the same spot repeatedly, with a margin of error less than 5 feet. A level of accuracy that wouldn't be matched until the invention of gunpowder artillery centuries later. Perhaps most remarkably, the trebuchet forced a revolution in castle design. The thick, rounded towers of late medieval castles weren't just aesthetic choices. They were direct responses to trebuchet bombardment, their curved surfaces designed to deflect incoming projectiles. Builders began embedding wooden beams within stone walls to absorb shock, a technique still used in earthquake-resistant construction today. So while the trebuchet's reign as the ultimate siege weapon eventually ended, its impact echoes through architecture, engineering, and even our understanding of physics, proof that even the tools of war can leave behind unexpected gifts. Gunpowder didn't just enter medieval Europe, it exploded onto the scene, shattering centuries of warfare tradition in a single, smoky blast. Picture the moment when a thunderous roar echoed across a battlefield for the first time, sending plumes of fire and debris into the air where arrows and lances once ruled. This wasn't merely a new weapon. It was a force so disruptive that it rendered the knight's shining armor as obsolete as a wooden shield against a cannonball. The arrival of gunpowder marked more than a technological shift. It was the death knell for an entire way of life, where individual skill and chivalric combat gave way to the impersonal, earth-shaking power of chemistry and physics. The earliest cannons, crude and unpredictable as they were, changed siege warfare overnight. Where trebuchets and battering rams had once labored for weeks to breach a single wall, A well-placed gunpowder charge could reduce towering fortifications to rubble in hours. At the siege of Constantinople in 1453, the Ottomans deployed massive bombards that hurled stone balls weighing over half a ton, each impact shaking the city's legendary walls until they crumbled. Defenders who had once felt safe behind meters of stone now faced a terrifying reality. No fortress was impregnable anymore. But it wasn't just the scale of destruction that unsettled the medieval world. The very nature of these weapons stripped combat of its traditional honor. A knight trained for decades in swordsmanship could be felled by a single ill-timed spark, his lifetime of skill meaningless against a weapon that required little more than a steady hand and a lit fuse. Handheld firearms accelerated this revolution. The arquebus, though slow to reload and prone to misfires, delivered a projectile with enough force to punch through even the finest plate armor at close range. Suddenly, the battlefield became a far more democratic and deadly place. A peasant with a firearm could kill a noble knight who had spent a fortune on his armor, upending the social hierarchy that had governed warfare for centuries. The psychological impact was profound. Chronicles from battles like in 1525 describe seasoned knights fleeing at the sight of enemy. Their courage no match for the eerie, mechanical certainty of gunfire. Yet gunpowder's most lasting legacy wasn't just in the weapons it created, but in the tactics it forced armies to adopt. The old shield walls and cavalry charges gave way to disciplined rows of musketeers, their volleys turning battlefields into lethal chessboards of positioning and timing. Even castles had to evolve, with thick, sloped bastions replacing vertical walls to deflect cannon fire. A design so effective it influenced military architecture for centuries. And here's the twist. Many of the innovations born from gunpowder's chaos laid the groundwork for modern warfare. The concept of standing armies, standardized equipment, and even the very idea of technological superiority as a decisive factor in war all trace their roots to this pivotal moment. What's often forgotten is how gunpowder's influence spilled beyond the battlefield. The same explosive power that toppled castles also carved tunnels through mountains, mined precious metals, and propelled humanity into an age of industrial ambition. Alchemists who once sought to turn lead into gold found themselves unlocking the secrets of combustion instead, their experiments paving the way for everything from fireworks to space travel. So while gunpowder may have ended the age of knights, it ignited something far greater, a relentless drive to harness the elements, for better or worse, that still defines our world today. The medieval battlefield would never look the same again, but in its smoky aftermath lay the sparks of progress that would shape the centuries to come. The stirrup might seem like a humble footrest, but its invention altered the course of warfare more dramatically than the flashiest sword or shield. Imagine clinging to a galloping horse with nothing but your thighs, every jolt threatening to send you tumbling. That was the reality for riders before this unassuming metal loop appeared. But with the introduction of the stirrup, everything changed. Suddenly, a knight could brace himself, channeling the full momentum of a charging horse through the tip of a lance. The result? A shock force so powerful it could splinter shield walls and crumple infantry lines like parchment. This wasn't just an upgrade. It was the birth of heavy cavalry as we know it. What made the stirrup so transformative was its deceptive simplicity. By providing a stable platform, it allowed riders to deliver blows with unprecedented force while remaining securely mounted. Historical accounts from Charlemagne's campaigns describe Frankish knights striking with such impact that their lances often shattered on contact, sending splinters flying like shrapnel. And here's the twist. The stirrup didn't just enhance offensive power, it revolutionized defense too. A knight braced in stirrups could absorb the recoil of a missed strike or a counterblow, turning what might have been a fatal stumble into a recoverable moment. This stability made mounted warriors nearly unstoppable against foot soldiers, creating a battlefield dominance that would last for centuries. The psychological effect was just as profound. The thunder of hooves, the glint of leveled lances, the sheer mass of armored horses bearing down. It was a spectacle designed to break morale before the first clash. At the Battle of Hastings in 1066, Norman knights used stirrupated charges to repeatedly scatter Anglo-Saxon shield walls, proving that disciplined infantry could crumble under the right kind of pressure. And as the technique spread across Europe and Asia, it spawned entirely new forms of warfare. Mongol horsemen combined stirrups with composite bows to create a deadly mobile archery system, while Middle Eastern cavalry perfected the art of swift, stirrup-assisted strikes and retreats. Yet the stirrup's legacy extends beyond combat. Its adoption reshaped societies, elevating the status of mounted warriors and fueling the rise of the knightly class. Training for stirrupated warfare required years of practice and expensive equipment, creating a martial elite that would dominate medieval politics. Even the design of castles evolved to accommodate cavalry, with wider gates and spiral staircases built to favor right-handed defenders. And in a poetic twist, the same technology that made knights so formidable on the battlefield also made them more vulnerable. Once gunpowder arrived, a mounted charge became a prime target for concentrated musket fire. What's often forgotten is how this simple invention influenced everyday life. The stability provided by stirrups made long-distance travel on horseback less exhausting, accelerating communication and trade across continents. Farmers adopted modified versions for plowing, and messengers could ride farther with less fatigue. Today, though we've traded lances for steering wheels, the principle remains the same. Sometimes, the smallest innovations, the ones we barely notice, are the ones that change the world. The next time you see a rider effortlessly guiding their horse, remember, those unassuming loops hanging at their sides are the unsung heroes of a revolution that shaped history. When a knight's sword glanced harmlessly off polished plate armor, the mace stepped in to deliver the kind of punishment no amount of steel could shrug off. Unlike blades that relied on piercing or slicing, this brutal instrument worked on a simpler principle, transferring every ounce of a warrior's strength into a single, concussive impact that rattled bones and turned armor into a liability. The mace's genius lay in its ruthless efficiency. A heavy metal head, often flanged or spiked, mounted on a sturdy shaft. Swing it with enough force, and even the finest breastplate would transmit enough energy to rupture organs or shatter ribs beneath. Historical accounts from battles reveal mass graves filled with skeletons, showing telltale skull fractures and crushed pelvises, gruesome proof of this weapon's devastating effectiveness. But the mace wasn't just a blunt instrument, it was in targeted violence. Skilled wielders aimed for the weak points armor couldn't fully protect: joints, the base of the neck, or the vulnerable space between helmet and breastplate. The flanged designs weren't merely decorative, They concentrated force into smaller surfaces, multiplying the damage with each strike. And in the chaos of close-quarters combat, where swords might get lodged in shields or require room to swing, the mace's compact arcs made it deadly even in cramped conditions. Chronicles describe knights using them in dungeon-like castle corridors or during frenzied melees, where a single well-placed blow could decide a fight in seconds. What's often overlooked is how the mace influenced armor's evolution. As these weapons grew more common, armorers began reinforcing vulnerable areas with extra layers or padding, early attempts at what we'd now call shock absorption. The iconic sallet helmet with its elongated neck guard, directly inspired by the need to deflect downward mace strikes. Even the shift toward rounded armor surfaces wasn't just about deflecting arrows. It helped glancing blows slide off rather than land squarely. This arms race between weapon and defense pushed metallurgy forward, with craftsmen experimenting with steel alloys that could withstand repeated impacts without cracking. The mace's legacy extends beyond its battlefield dominance. Its principles live on in modern riot-control batons and breaching tools, where concentrated force must overcome barriers without sharp edges. Even the humble hammer owes some of its design lineage to this medieval game-changer. So while it lacked the elegance of a sword or the range of a longbow, the mace carved its place in history by solving a problem no other weapon could, turning the knight's greatest advantage into his worst nightmare. In the end, it proved a timeless truth. Sometimes, the most effective solutions aren't the most complex, but the ones that apply power exactly where it hurts the most. The halberd didn't just serve a single purpose, it redefined versatility on the battlefield. Picture a weapon that could hook a knight from his saddle, cleave through armor with an axe blade, and thrust like a spear all in one fluid motion. This was no niche tool. It was the medieval equivalent of a Swiss army knife, engineered for maximum utility in the chaos of combat. Swiss mercenaries, renowned for their disciplined infantry squares, turned the halberd into their signature weapon, wielding it with such precision that they dominated European battlefields for generations. Its secret lay in its hybrid design, a marriage of three deadly functions that allowed a single soldier to adapt instantly to whatever threat came his way. What made the halberd so revolutionary was its brutal efficiency. The axe head could deliver crushing blows capable of splitting helmets or severing limbs, while the opposite side's spike punched through like a hot knife through butter. But the real game-changer was the hook. With a quick twist, a halberdier could yank a mounted knight clean off his horse, turning the tide of a cavalry charge in seconds. Historical accounts from battles like in 1315 describe Swiss formations using halberds to create a lethal forest of blades, where charging knights found themselves unhorsed and helpless before they could even close the distance. And at range, the spear tip kept enemies at bay, making the halberd just as deadly in open field skirmishes as it was in the press of a melee. The halberd's influence extended far beyond its physical capabilities. Its design forced armies to rethink unit cohesion and training. Unlike specialized weapons that required years to master, the halberd's intuitive combination of movements meant recruits could achieve battlefield readiness in months. This democratization of skill allowed Swiss cantons to field highly effective peasant armies that could stand toe-to-toe with aristocratic knights, an early challenge to the feudal order. Even the weapon's length, typically 6 to 8 feet, became a tactical advantage. Formations wielding halberds could present a wall of lethal points while maintaining enough spacing to swing freely, a balance earlier polearms like pikes couldn't match. Yet perhaps the most telling proof of the halberd's brilliance was its staying power. While most medieval weapons faded into obsolescence with the advent of gunpowder, halberds evolved. Guards in royal courts carried ceremonial versions well into the 17th century, their polished blades symbolizing authority. Modern replicas still demonstrate its terrifying versatility. Museum tests show a skilled wielder can switch between chopping, thrusting, and hooking motions faster than an opponent can react. And in a way, the halberd's legacy lives on in today's multi-tool survival gear and tactical equipment, proving that the best designs aren't those that excel at one task, but those that adapt to countless challenges. From the muddy fields of medieval Europe to the halls of Renaissance palaces, this unassuming polearm quietly shaped the art of war more than any flashy sword or ornate battle axe ever could. A knight's armor could deflect sword strikes and stop arrows, but one well-placed slash to the neck could end everything, until the coif turned vulnerability into resilience. This ingenious hood of interlocking metal rings addressed medieval combat's paradox: how to protect the head and neck without sacrificing the ability to turn, duck, or strike. Unlike rigid plate that might restrict movement, the coif draped like fabric, its thousands of meticulously riveted rings dispersing the energy of blows across a wide area. Historical accounts from the Crusades describe warriors surviving direct scimitar strikes that would have decapitated them. The coif's flexible mesh catching blades, just enough to turn a killing blow into a survivable wound. What made the coif exceptional wasn't just its construction, it was its adaptability. Worn beneath a great helm or over a padded arming cap, it created a layered defense system. The outer helmet absorbed crushing impacts, while the coif beneath prevented blades from sliding through ventilation holes or gaps. At the Battle of in 1191, Richard the Lionheart's knights credited their coifs with stopping Saracen arrows that pierced their surcoats, but tangled harmlessly in the mail. And in close combat, that flexibility proved equally vital. A knight could take a mace strike to the helmet, have his head snapped backward by the force, and still avoid whiplash injuries thanks to the coif's ability to move independently of both armor and skin. The coif's design reveals fascinating insights into medieval priorities. While most armor evolved to cover more surface area over time, the coif remained relatively unchanged for centuries, proof of its near-perfect functionality. Each ring, typically just a quarter-inch in diameter, was either welded solid or riveted shut to prevent spreading under stress. The densest patterns placed up to 20 rings per square inch around the throat and collarbone, areas where major blood vessels ran close to the surface. Yet despite this protection, the coif weighed only 3 to 5 pounds, lighter than a modern motorcycle helmet, allowing prolonged wear without neck strain. Perhaps the coif's greatest legacy was its democratization of protection. While full plate armor required a lord's ransom to produce, a simple mail hood could be crafted by any competent blacksmith. This made it the first line of defense for everyone from lowly men-at-arms to kings, bridging the gap between social classes on the battlefield. Even after plate armor rendered full mail suits obsolete, The coif persisted as a last line of defense for areas helmets couldn't fully shield. Today, its influence endures in the layered protective systems of bomb disposal suits and riot gear, where flexibility and coverage remain paramount. So the next time you see a medieval depiction, look closely at that shimmering neck covering. It's not just decoration, but the product of centuries of life-saving innovation. The shield wasn't just protection, it was a portable fortress, a game-changing innovation that turned the slow, vulnerable process of reloading a crossbow into a survivable endeavor. Picture a crossbowman crouching behind a towering wooden barrier, its surface emblazoned with vivid depictions of saints or the crest of his lord, as enemy arrows clatter harmlessly against the thick planks. Unlike round shields designed for melee combat, the stood nearly 4 feet tall, wide enough to fully conceal a kneeling man, and thick enough to stop even armor-piercing bolts mid-flight. This was no mere defensive tool. It was a tactical revolution that allowed ranged units to maintain relentless volleys without becoming easy targets. What set the apart was its ingenious adaptability. Many featured a hinged prop or sharpened bottom edge, letting soldiers drive them into the earth like miniature palisades. In open battles, formations of bearers could create instant defensive lines, transforming any patch of ground into a makeshift stronghold. During sieges, attackers used them as mobile cover while advancing on castle walls, their surfaces often by the time they reached the base. But the real brilliance lay in the teamwork they enabled. Historical records from battles like describe squires, shield bearers whose sole role was to reposition mid-combat, creating shifting zones of safety that let focus on aiming rather than dodging. The psychological impact was just as calculated as its physical protection. Those vividly painted designs weren't mere decoration. They served as rallying points, morale boosters, and even psychological warfare. A line of depicting snarling beasts or vengeful angels could unsettle enemy troops before the first bolt was loosed. Some Venetian designs even incorporated polished metal accents to reflect sunlight, dazzling opponents at critical moments. And when the fighting ended, these shields doubled as stretchers for the wounded, their sturdy construction perfect for bearing men from the field. A poignant reminder that the same tool designed for killing could also save lives. Yet this legacy extends beyond medieval battlefields. Its principles live on in modern ballistic shields used by SWAT teams and military units, where lightweight composites replace wood, but the core idea remains unchanged. Mobile, personal protection that enables offensive action. Even riot police formations echo this tactical DNA, with interlocking shields creating temporary barriers in fluid situations. So while the who relied on these shields are long gone, their solution to an age-old problem, how to fight effectively while exposed, still resonates wherever protection and mobility must coexist. The proves that sometimes the most enduring inventions aren't weapons themselves, but the tools that let warriors wield them without fear. The flail didn't just hit, it danced, a whirling nightmare of spiked iron that all attempts to block or predict. Imagine facing a weapon that could snake around your shield like a living thing, its heavy ball gaining terrifying momentum before crashing into your ribs with the force of a falling hammer. This wasn't precision engineering. It was controlled chaos, harnessing the raw physics of a swinging weight to deliver blows no rigid weapon could match. Historical combat manuals warn that even seasoned warriors hesitated to use flails, not just because they required immense skill, but because a mistimed swing could rebound onto the wielder with crippling force. Yet in the right hands, that very unpredictability became its greatest strength. What made the flail so terrifying was its ability to exploit every weakness in contemporary defenses. While swords glanced off plate armor and axes got caught in shield rims, the flail's chain allowed its head to whip over or around obstacles, striking from angles that seemed impossible. The Hussite wars of the 15th century saw peasant rebels using agricultural flails, modified with iron bands and spikes, to devastating effect against armored knights. Even the most expensive helmet couldn't fully protect against a flail ball that could curve over the brim to strike the vulnerable back of the skull. And the psychological impact was just as potent. The eerie whistling sound of a spinning flail created a unique auditory terror, distinct from the clang of swords or the thud of maces. But the flail's design also reveals fascinating insights into medieval problem-solving. When faced with increasingly sophisticated armor, warriors didn't just make heavier weapons, they invented entirely new ways to transfer energy. The chain acted as a force multiplier, allowing a relatively small iron ball to hit with the impact of something twice its weight. Some variants featured multiple balls or elongated spikes designed to catch and twist limbs, turning the human body against itself. Yet this brutality came at a cost. Recovered skeletons from medieval battlefields show flail injuries are often identifiable by their distinctive patterns. Crushed bones with small, deep punctures where spikes anchored during impact, suggesting victims were sometimes literally dragged down by their own wounds. The flail's legacy extends beyond its battlefield use. Its principles influenced later weapons like the naval chain shot, designed to tangle in a ship's rigging, and even modern riot control devices that use flexible projectiles to circumvent barriers. Perhaps most telling is how it persists in popular culture, from fantasy art to video games, as the ultimate symbol of medieval savagery. Because while swords represent honor and axes embody raw power, the flail reminds us that warfare has always had room for the unpredictable, the unorthodox, and the outright terrifying. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a statement that in the desperate calculus of combat, sometimes chaos itself could be forged into a tool. The war hammer didn't just crush, it calculated, in lethal precision disguised as a simple tool. While other weapons relied on brute force or sweeping slashes, this deceptively compact instrument turned armor's greatest strength into its fatal flaw. Picture a knight in gleaming plate, confident against swords and arrows, only to meet a hammerhead no larger than a clenched fist, yet with enough concentrated force to dent steel like tin. The spike on the reverse side, a surgeon's scalpel in iron, designed to slip through visor slits or puncture at the joints with piston-like efficiency. Historical combat manuals from the 14th century depict warriors using war hammers in tight, economical motions. No wild swings needed when a precise tap to the temple could scramble a man's brains inside his own helmet. What set the war hammer apart was its dual nature. The hammerhead delivered concussive blows that transmitted energy through armor, causing internal trauma without breaking the surface, while the spike exploited the inevitable gaps in even the finest plate. Accounts from the battle describe French knights collapsing mid-charge, their armor outwardly intact, but their bodies beneath shattered by well-placed strikes. And unlike bulkier weapons, the warhammer's compact size made it ideal for the claustrophobic chaos of melees. A knight could wield it single-handed from horseback or in the press of infantry, switching seamlessly between hammer and spike as opportunities arose. The Hussite warriors of Bohemia perfected this adaptability, using war hammers to dismantle armored opponents before they could regain their footing. The weapon's design reveals a chilling sophistication. Later variants featured elongated spikes resembling birds' beaks, earning them the name, curved to hook limbs or pull riders from saddles. Some included metal strips extending down the shaft to protect against blade strikes, showing how every element addressed a specific battlefield problem. Even the weight distribution was deliberate, just enough heft to maximize impact without sacrificing speed, a balance modern engineers would applaud. Museum tests demonstrate that a war hammer spike driven by a trained arm could penetrate up to 2 inches of seasoned oak, a sobering reminder of what it could do to human bone. Yet the warhammer's legacy extends beyond its gruesome effectiveness. It symbolized a shift in medieval combat philosophy, from overwhelming force to targeted efficiency. Armorers responded with innovations like articulated plate joints and reinforced gorgets, sparking an arms race that pushed metallurgy forward. Today, its principles live on in breaching tools and tactical tomahawks, where precision and versatility outweigh raw power. So while it may lack the romance of swords or the spectacle of polearms, the warhammer stands as a testament to a simple truth. In warfare and engineering alike, sometimes the most elegant solutions are the ones that apply the right force in exactly the right place. The mantlet didn't just shield soldiers, it brought the castle wall to them, a rolling fortress that turned the deadliest approach into a survivable march. Imagine creeping toward towering stone defenses under a hail of arrows, each step potentially your last, when suddenly, a line of wooden giants on wheels creaks forward, their surfaces layered with water-soaked hides that hiss as flaming projectiles impact harmlessly. This was siege warfare stripped to its essentials, not just brute force, but the clever use of physics and psychology to neutralize an enemy's advantages. Chronicles from the Siege of in 1204 describe Norman attackers advancing behind mantlets so sturdy that defenders resorted to dropping millstones from the battlements in desperation, a testament to how these mobile barriers could frustrate even the most creative countermeasures. What set the mantlet apart was its brutal practicality. Unlike static siege towers that took weeks to construct, these shields could be assembled quickly from prefabricated parts, then disassembled and reused. Their sloped design wasn't just about deflecting arrows. It created a roof-like surface that caused dropped stones to roll off rather than punch through. The wet animal hides draped over them served dual purposes, extinguishing fire arrows and adding a flexible layer that absorbed the kinetic energy of crossbow bolts. Some accounts even mention hides being soaked in vinegar or urine to make them more resistant to burning, a pungent but effective battlefield improvisation. At the Siege of Acre, Crusaders reported mantlets so densely packed with embedded arrows that they resembled porcupines by the assault's end. Yet the men behind them remained unscathed. The real genius of the Mantlet lay in its adaptability. Sappers, specialists in undermining walls, used reinforced versions with angled bottoms to protect themselves as they chipped at foundations. Archer crews deployed lighter models with arrow slits, turning defensive cover into mobile firing positions. Engineers even experimented with hinged mantlets that could be folded like modern room dividers, allowing rapid deployment in uneven terrain. This versatility made them indispensable across cultures. Mongolian siege trains included collapsible mantlets carried by camels, while Japanese versions used bamboo lattices to reduce weight without sacrificing strength. Yet the mantlet's legacy extends beyond its physical protection. Its use reveals a profound shift in medieval tactics, the recognition that survival often depended on controlling the approach as much as the assault itself. Modern military historians see echoes of its principles in everything from World War I, sap trenches, to today's ballistic shields used by riot police. Even the angled armor on modern tanks owes a conceptual debt to those sloping wooden surfaces designed 8 centuries ago. So while the mantlet may lack the drama of trebuchets or the glamour of knightly charges, it represents something far more enduring: the timeless art of making advance possible under impossible conditions. Caltrops didn't just litter the battlefield. They weaponized the very ground beneath an army's feet. Picture a cavalry charge at full gallop, thundering toward enemy lines with earth-shaking momentum, when suddenly, horses scream and buckle as razor-sharp spikes pierce their hooves. These deceptively simple 4-pronged devices, each point angled so one always faced upward, turned open fields into treacherous obstacle courses. Unlike complex siege engines or expensive armor, Caltrops embodied brutal efficiency. Any soldier could carry dozens in a pouch, scattering them in seconds to create instant defensive zones. Historical records from the Mongol invasions describe entire cavalry units rerouting or scattering, rather than risk crossing areas where these horse breakers had been strewn, proving that sometimes the smallest weapons could dictate the largest tactical decisions. What made Caltrops so devastating was their psychological precision. While arrows and spears targeted bodies, Caltrops attacked mobility, the lifeline of any medieval force. A single spike could lame a warhorse, topple an armored knight, or leave infantry hobbled and vulnerable. At the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, Scottish forces littered approach routes with caltrops hidden in grass, crippling English cavalry before they could even engage. But the real genius lay in their universality. Whether made from wrought iron by professional smiths or hastily forged nails lashed together by peasants, every variant shared the same deadly effectiveness. Even the Romans had used them centuries earlier, calling them after the spiky seeds of puncture vines that inspired their design, a rare case of nature's ingenuity being perfectly adapted for warfare. The Caltrops' legacy extends far beyond medieval battlefields. Its principles endure in modern anti-vehicle spikes used by law enforcement, where retractable versions deploy across roads to halt fleeing cars. Military engineers still study their effectiveness in area denial tactics, and some security systems use miniature versions to deter trespassers. Even nature preserves employ biodegradable caltrop analogs to protect sensitive areas from off-road vehicles. This unbroken thread of innovation, from ancient battlefields to contemporary security, proves that the most enduring solutions often emerge from straightforward observations. After all, the Caltrop's design required no complex physics or rare materials, just a keen understanding of vulnerability and a willingness to exploit it. Perhaps the most telling testament to their effectiveness comes from the adaptations they forced. Cavalry began equipping horses with reinforced hoof boots, while scouts developed techniques for spotting and clearing fields of scattered spikes. Some armies even trained dogs to retrieve caltrops, though the risks to the animals were considerable. This constant back and forth between weapon and countermeasure became a microcosm of medieval warfare's evolving nature. Today, when we see highway spike strips unfurl or armored vehicles deploy anti-mine systems, we're witnessing the latest chapter in a story that began with 4 sharpened pieces of metal and a very simple idea. Sometimes, the most dangerous weapons are the ones you never see coming. When defenders peered from their battlements to see a massive, wheeled structure rumbling toward their gates, they knew time was running out. The battering ram was siege warfare's relentless heartbeat, a fusion of raw power and clever engineering that turned even the mightiest doors into splinters. Far from the simple logs depicted in films, medieval rams were masterpieces of adaptation. Craftsmen clad them in layers of fire-resistant oxhide, soaked in water or vinegar to repel flaming arrows. Wheels transformed them from cumbersome burdens into mobile siege engines that could reposition with alarming speed. And the addition of sloped roofs, pure genius, turning what could have been a suicide mission into a methodical demolition job, sheltered from the deadly rain of projectiles and boiling liquids hurled from above. The most advanced rams operated like medieval tanks. Historical accounts from the Siege of Jerusalem in 1099 describe a Frankish ram nicknamed the Sow for its low, hulking profile. Its roof wasn't just protection. It housed a crew compartment where men could work in shifts, maintaining a rhythmic pounding that never let defenders catch their breath. Some designs even incorporated suspension systems, using ropes or chains to let the ram's head swing with greater momentum. The effect was devastating. At the Siege of Acre, a single reinforced ram reportedly shattered iron-reinforced gates in under an hour, its ironclad head striking with the consistency of a metronome until the wood groaned and gave way. But the battering ram's true brilliance lay in its psychological warfare. The steady, echoing boom of timber against metal wasn't just physical force, it was a countdown, each impact reminding defenders that their strongest barrier was finite. Some commanders added grotesque carvings to ram heads, turning them into monstrous faces that seemed to gnaw at the gates. Others timed their strikes to coincide with taunts or war drums, creating an unbearable tension within the walls. Records from the Siege of Tyre describe defenders abandoning their posts simply to escape the relentless noise, their nerves frayed beyond endurance. What's often forgotten is how rams spurred defensive innovation. The same siege that saw a gate fall might inspire thicker, double-layered doors, or the addition of murder holes above entrances. Some castles began installing counter-rams, giant pendulums behind gates that would swing outward to collide with incoming rams in a brutal game of kinetic chicken. This arms race between smashing and shielding pushed medieval engineering to new heights, with each breakthrough in defense met by an adaptation in attack. The ram's legacy endures in surprising ways. Modern breaching tools used by firefighters and SWAT teams owe their DNA to those medieval designs, prioritizing protected crews and rhythmic force. Even the concept of psychological pressure during sieges finds echoes in contemporary negotiations, where relentless consistency can erode resistance as effectively as any physical blow. So while we now associate siege warfare with towering trebuchets or flashy cannons, it was the humble battering ram, patient, persistent, and utterly inexorable, that proved no fortress was truly impregnable. Just as flowing water eventually wears down stone, these engineered logs taught a timeless lesson. Given enough time and the right tools, even the mightiest barriers will yield. A fortress's towering walls meant nothing when a siege tower rolled into view, a behemoth on wheels that turned vertical defenses into mere. These wooden giants, some standing over 30 feet tall, represented the pinnacle of medieval offensive engineering, combining scale, mobility, and psychological terror in one audacious package. Unlike battering rams that chipped away at gates or trebuchets that pounded from afar, siege towers delivered the ultimate shock tactic: fresh combatants directly onto enemy battlements, bypassing every ground-level defense. The Siege of Jerusalem in 1099 saw crusaders construct a tower so massive it required dismantling nearby houses for timber, only for defenders to burn it with Greek fire, sparking an arms race of fireproofing techniques that would redefine siege warfare. What made these structures so revolutionary was their adaptability. Builders tailored each tower to its target: narrower designs for cramped terrain, broader platforms for mass assaults, and increasingly sophisticated armor to counter defender innovations. At the Siege of Lisbon in 1147, attackers draped their tower in freshly skinned animal hides, still glistening with fat, a grisly but effective fire retardant that repelled flaming arrows. More advanced versions housed interior staircases, allowing continuous troop rotations, turning the tower into a vertical conveyor belt of violence. Some even incorporated hinged drawbridges that slammed down onto battlements, creating instant assault routes while shielding attackers during the final approach. The psychological impact was immeasurable. Defenders watching a creaking tower inch forward knew their height advantage. The very foundation of medieval defense was about to vanish. The construction process itself became theater of war. Teams of carpenters worked under mobile roofs called cats to shield them from arrows, while ox teams dragged pre-assembled sections into position under cover of darkness. Historical accounts from the Siege of Tyre describe Alexander the Great's engineers building a siege tower so wide it required 2,000 men to push, its sheer scale demoralizing defenders before the first soldier ascended. Later medieval versions improved mobility with innovative axle systems, allowing towers to navigate uneven terrain that would have stalled earlier models. In 1204, attackers disassembled and reassembled their tower 3 times to outmaneuver defensive countermeasures, proving that adaptability could outweigh brute strength. Yet siege towers also forced defenders to innovate in response. The invention of machicolations, overhanging stone galleries with murder holes, allowed castle garrisons to drop stones or boiling liquids vertically onto approaching towers. Some fortresses built retractable wooden outworks that extended like fists to keep towers at bay, while others stockpiled quicklime to blind attackers mid-ascent. This constant back and forth spurred advancements in pulley systems, structural bracing, and even early chemical warfare. The siege tower's legacy extends beyond its eventual obsolescence. Its principles live on in modern firefighting turrets, aircraft boarding ramps, and even spacecraft docking systems, all descendants of that simple but revolutionary idea. When you can't go through or around, sometimes the most audacious solution is to go straight over. These wooden titans remind us that medieval warfare wasn't just about force. It was about reimagining the possible, one creaking, towering step at a time. The falchion didn't just cut. It carved its way through history as one of medieval Europe's most brutally efficient close combat weapons. Picture a blade that combined the cleaving power of an axe with the fluid motion of a sword, its curved edge biting deep into armor gaps with terrifying precision. Unlike the straight double-edged swords favored by knights, the falchion's single-edged, slightly widened tip concentrated force into every slash, turning what might have been a glancing blow into a fight-ending wound. Historical accounts from the Crusades describe its distinctive crescent shape, leaving gruesome injuries. Limbs nearly severed by single strokes, mail links sheared apart like cloth. Yet what made this weapon truly remarkable wasn't just its lethality, but its origins. The falchion's DNA traced back to Middle Eastern designs like the proof that even in an age of constant warfare, ideas flowed freely across battle lines. What set the falchion apart was its deceptive versatility. The curvature of its blade allowed for powerful draw cuts, a technique where the wielder pulled the edge across the target, multiplying the damage. This made it devastating against lightly armored foes, yet its weighted tip could also crush through mail when swung with enough force. Manuscript illustrations from the 13th century show falchions in the hands of both knights and common foot soldiers, suggesting its appeal crossed social boundaries. At the Battle of in 1298, English infantry reportedly used falchions to hack through Scottish spear formations, their shorter blades ideal for the tight press of melee combat. And unlike great swords that required extensive training to master, the falchion's intuitive design made it accessible to conscripts and seasoned warriors alike. The weapon's cross-cultural heritage tells a fascinating story of medieval globalization. Crusaders encountering curved swords in the Holy Land recognized their superiority against the layered cloth armor common in desert warfare. European smiths then adapted these designs, adding broader blades and more pronounced curves to suit their own combat needs. Some surviving examples feature inscriptions in both Latin and Arabic, hinting at workshops where craftsmen from different traditions collaborated. This cultural blending extended to decoration. Falchions owned by nobility often boasted elaborate hilts with enameled motifs inspired by Islamic metalwork, turning tools of war into symbols of prestige and worldly sophistication. Yet the falchion's legacy extends beyond its battlefield prowess. Its influence can be seen in later cavalry sabers and even modern machetes, where curvature and weight distribution optimize cutting efficiency. Museums that test replicas demonstrate how its unique geometry requires less force to achieve deeper cuts compared to straight blades, a lesson in ergonomics that resonates through centuries of weapon design. So while it may lack the romantic reputation of the brutal simplicity of the mace, the falchion stands as a testament to a timeless truth. The best solutions often emerge when different worlds collide, sharpen each other's ideas, and forge something entirely new. The lance rest may have been a modest piece of metal, but its impact on medieval warfare was anything but small. Picture a knight in full plate armor, his horse thundering across the battlefield at full gallop. Without that unassuming hook welded to his breastplate, the full momentum of the charge would dissipate the moment his lance struck. This simple bracket transformed cavalry tactics by allowing riders to couch their lances, locking them firmly under the arm and against the body, turning horse and rider into a single, unstoppable projectile. Historical manuscripts from the 14th century depict knights practicing with lance rests, their weapons held at perfect horizontal angles as they charged at straw dummies, with enough force to send splinters flying 30 feet through the air. What made the lance rest revolutionary was its precision engineering. Unlike earlier methods where riders had to grip and guide their lances manually, this small metal extension bore the brunt of the impact. The moment before collision, a knight could brace his entire body, letting the rest absorb the shock while directing every ounce of the horse's speed into the tip of his weapon. Accounts from the Battle of in 1214 describe French knights piercing clean through 2 enemy soldiers with a single strike, their lance rests ensuring the force didn't send them tumbling backward upon impact. Even the angle mattered. Most rests were slightly upward curved to prevent the lance from dipping during the charge, a subtle adjustment that meant the difference between a glancing blow and a lethal hit. But the lance rest's brilliance extended beyond pure physics. It allowed knights to focus on steering and timing rather than muscle control, making the devastating charge accessible to less experienced riders. Suddenly, cavalry units could maintain formation without each knight worrying about balancing their lance mid-gallop. The psychological effect was equally significant. The sight of a line of couched lances, each one unwavering, perfectly level, created an almost mechanical wall of death advancing at frightening speed. Chronicles from the 100 Years' War describe English breaking ranks prematurely at the mere sight of French lancers lowering their weapons in unison, the very predictability of their approach becoming its own weapon. Yet, like all innovations, the lance rest sparked countermeasures. Infantry began carrying pikes with reinforced shafts designed to snap lances on impact, while some foot soldiers used hooked poles to yank riders from their saddles the moment their charge stalled. Armorers responded by reinforcing lance rests with additional bracing, leading to the distinctive Grand Guard, plates seen on late medieval jousting armor. This arms race between offense and defense pushed metallurgy forward, with smiths experimenting with spring steel mounts to absorb even greater recoil. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of the lance rest lies in its influence beyond warfare. The principle of redirecting kinetic energy through bracing and support revolutionized everything from carriage designs to early firearm stocks. Even modern sports equipment, from javelin throwing to pole vaulting, owes a debt to that medieval realization. Sometimes, the smallest point of contact can channel the greatest force. So while it lacks the dramatic flair of a flail or the imposing size of a trebuchet, the lance rest stands as a quiet testament to how medieval minds solved problems not just with brute strength, but with elegant physics. In the end, it wasn't the weight of the knight or the sharpness of the lance that made the charge deadly. It was the genius of a hook no bigger than a man's hand. Beneath the clatter of plate armor and the shimmer of lay the Gambesson, a quilted masterpiece that proved medieval warriors understood survival wasn't just about deflecting blows, but absorbing them. This unassuming padded jacket, often dismissed as mere undergarment, was in fact a marvel of textile engineering, capable of turning a lethal strike into a survivable bruise. Picture layers of linen or wool stuffed with scrap fabric, horsehair, or even grass, stitched into dense, shock-absorbing channels. Far from passive padding, a high-quality Gambesson could withstand slashing attacks and, astonishingly, halt arrows at close range. Tests with modern replicas show that a half-inch of tightly packed layers could stop a broadhead arrow fired from 20 yards, the fabric fibers tangling around the point like a net. What made the Gambesson revolutionary was its dual role as protector and enabler. Knights wearing plate armor relied on it to prevent chafing and distribute weight, but foot soldiers often wore reinforced versions as armor. The Battle of Hastings tapestry depicts Norman infantry in Gambessons surviving arrow volleys that felled lesser protected men. Later designs incorporated silk linings, an early form of puncture resistance, or were boiled in wax to harden into stiff, cuirass-like protection. Yet its true genius lay in adaptability. Unlike metal armor that required a smith's expertise to adjust, a Gambesson could be tailored by any competent seamstress, making it the most democratic form of protection on the medieval battlefield. The Gambesson's layered construction reveals medieval insights into energy dispersion that still inform modern body armor. Those quilted channels weren't random. They created thousands of tiny friction, points to slow and trap weapon tips. Some surviving examples show up to 30 layers in vital areas, with alternating grain directions to prevent clean tears. Warriors soon discovered that a Gambesson worn beneath could stop a blade from slipping through the rings, while one worn over plate added crucial insulation against winter cold or the scorching heat of desert campaigns during the Crusades. Perhaps the most telling testament to its effectiveness comes from the enemies who feared it. Mongol horse archers, masters of mobile warfare, specifically targeted gaps in Gambesson coverage, knowing the armor could negate their arrows' deadliness. European accounts of the 100 Years' War describe English aiming for faces or legs when facing opponents clad in particularly thick padded jacks. Even after plate armor fell from favor, the Gambesson evolved into the buff coat of the Renaissance, proof that sometimes the humblest innovations outlast the flashiest. Today, its legacy endures in the layered Kevlar of bulletproof vests and the shock-absorbing foams of sports gear, reminding us that the best protection often comes not from a single impenetrable barrier, but from many working in quiet harmony. The Springle didn't just hurl projectiles, it perfected the art of mechanical precision centuries before gunpowder changed everything. Imagine a massive crossbow engineered to siege proportions, its torsion springs coiled, then a snake ready to strike, capable of launching a stone the size of a human head clean over castle walls with sniper-like accuracy. Unlike the unpredictable Trebuchet or the slower-loading cannon, this tension-powered marvel operated on principles so refined that modern engineers still study surviving designs. Historical records from the siege of Bedford Castle in 1224, describes springled bolts piercing through multiple defenders in a single shot, their iron tips still visible protruding from the inner keep's timber supports days after the assault. What set the Springled apart was its blend of power and control. Twin torsion bundles, typically made from twisted horsehair or sinew, provided consistent force, while a winch system allowed crews to adjust tension for different ranges. The result? A weapon that could alternate between smashing stone walls with heavy shots and picking off defenders with armor-piercing bolts, all without changing position. Manuscript illustrations from the Crusades show Springles mounted on castle towers as defensive artillery, their compact frames requiring just 3 crew members compared to the dozen needed for larger siege engines. At the Siege of Acre, Crusaders reportedly used springled volleys to clear enemy battlements before assaults, creating temporary dead zones where no defender could stand without risk of instant impalement. The Springled's legacy lies in its mechanical sophistication. Its vertical frame design minimized lateral movement during firing, allowing rapid consecutive shots, a feature later replicated in early cannon carriages. The sliding trough that guided projectiles foreshadowed modern barrel rifling, reducing erratic flight patterns. Even its trigger mechanism, often a rotating lever system, demonstrated an understanding of energy transfer that wouldn't be matched until Renaissance-era crossbows. Museums with reconstructed models demonstrate its eerie quietness compared to gunpowder weapons. Where cannons announced their presence with thunderous booms, the Springle dispatched death with just a sharp twang and the whistle of incoming doom. Yet perhaps its greatest contribution was proving that mechanical artillery could rival gunpowder's destructive potential. When Edward I employed Springleds during his Welsh campaigns, chroniclers noted their psychological impact. Defenders who'd grown accustomed to predicting Trebuchet shots found these faster, flatter trajectories impossible to evade. The lesson was clear. Innovation in warfare wasn't just about raw power, but about rethinking delivery systems. Today, while we marvel at trebuchets in documentaries, it's the Springled's DNA we see in everything from tension-based ballistics research to modern siege weapon recreations. Proof that some medieval inventions were so far ahead of their time, they still haven't been fully outclassed. The Polax didn't just adapt to combat, it redefined versatility, a Swiss army knife of destruction that turned medieval warriors into walking arsenals. Picture a weapon that combined the cleaving force of an axe, the blunt trauma of a hammer, and the lethal precision of all mounted on a sturdy 5-foot shaft. This wasn't just a tool for war. It was in problem-solving, allowing a single knight to dismantle armored opponents with surgical efficiency. Historical fight manuals from the 15th century depict Polax techniques so refined they resemble chess moves. Every swing, thrust, or hook calculated to exploit gaps in plate armor with chilling precision. At the Battle of where mud and chaos rendered swords nearly useless, the Polax became the weapon of choice for dismounted knights, its balanced design cutting through the fray like a scalpel through flesh. What set the Polax apart was its modular brutality. The hammer side delivered concussive blows capable of denting helmets and shattering collarbones, while the opposite axe blade could hook limbs or shear through like parchment. The spear tip, a last resort stiletto for piercing visor slits or gaps at the armpits, but the real genius lay in its proportions. Unlike unwieldy polearms that required sweeping motions, the poleaxe's shorter haft allowed tight, controlled strikes perfect for the claustrophobic press of melee combat. Manuscript illustrations from Burgundy show knights using poleaxes in near-vertical motions, short, devastating chops that conserved energy while maximizing damage, a technique modern martial artists call the murder stroke. The weapon's design reveals fascinating insights into medieval combat pragmatism. Surviving examples often feature metal strips running down the shaft to prevent enemy blades from severing the wood, proof that every element addressed real battlefield threats. Some variants included a rondelle guard near the grip to protect the wielder's hands, while others had fluted hammer faces to concentrate impact force. Museums that test replicas demonstrate how a well-placed poleaxe strike could transfer enough energy through plate armor to rupture organs without breaking the surface, turning a knight's greatest strength into a deadly liability. Yet the poleaxe's legacy extends beyond its physical lethality. It represented a philosophical shift in medieval warfare, the recognition that no single weapon could dominate every scenario. Knights who once carried swords as status symbols began adopting poleaxes as practical problem solvers, their multi-purpose design mirroring the era's growing emphasis on adaptability. Even the terminology reflected this. German manuscripts called it the knightly hammer, while Italian masters referred to it as the key to armor. Today, its DNA lives on in modern breaching tools and tactical tomahawks, proving that the most enduring designs aren't those built for specialization, but those ready to meet chaos with calculated versatility. Perhaps the most telling testament to its effectiveness comes from the armor it inspired. The iconic hourglass gauntlets of the late 15th century, designed specifically to deflect poleaxe hooks. The sudden prevalence of reinforced gorgets and raised helmet visors, direct responses to its ruthless precision. In the end, the poleaxe didn't just change how knights fought, it changed how they thought about survival, teaching a lesson that still resonates. On the battlefield or beyond, the solutions are often the ones that keep your options open. The hoarding didn't just defend castles, it turned them into three-dimensional death traps, where attackers suddenly found themselves exposed from every angle. Picture a fortress seemingly growing wooden fangs as these covered galleries unfolded from its walls, defenders lurking inside like spiders in a web. Unlike static battlements that forced soldiers to lean perilously over edges, hoardings gave garrisons complete control over the killing zone below. Historical accounts from the siege describe boiling oil streaming through gaps in the floorboards, while rocks and arrows rained down at impossible angles, attacks coming not just from above, but from directly overhead. This was medieval psychological warfare at its finest, transforming what should have been the safety of a wall's shadow into the most dangerous place on the battlefield. What made hoardings so devastating was their ruthless efficiency. Built from prefabricated sections that could be rapidly assembled during sieges, these wooden extensions often featured downward-sloping floors to prevent debris from piling up inside. Some designs included hinged murder holes that could be flipped open to drop cauldrons of quicklime, a substance that reacted violently with water, blinding and burning anyone it touched. before snapping shut to protect the defenders. At Richard the Lionheart's engineers designed hoardings with overlapping layers, creating a cascading effect where projectiles would bounce and ricochet unpredictably below. The effect wasn't just lethal, it was demoralizing. Chronicles from the Crusade describe besiegers abandoning entire assaults after witnessing their comrades crushed under stones that seemed to materialize from the very masonry itself. The real genius of hoardings lay in their reversibility. Unlike permanent stone machicolations that required extensive rebuilding, these wooden galleries could be dismantled and stored during peacetime, then erected in hours when threats loomed. Some castles even designed their walls with special sockets and brackets to speed assembly, turning hoardings from improvised defenses into systematic components of castle warfare. This adaptability extended to their construction materials. While oak was preferred for durability, sieges in arid regions saw hoardings built from sun-baked clay reinforced with horsehair, proving that necessity truly mothered invention. Yet hoardings didn't just influence tactics, they reshaped castle architecture itself. The sudden ability to defend vertically meant builders began favoring taller, thinner walls over the squat, thick designs of earlier keeps. Arrow slits angled downward appeared beneath hoarding positions, creating deadly crossfires. Even the decorative stone corbels that supported these structures became status symbols. The more elaborate the carvings, the more a lord could advertise his castle's impregnability. Modern military historians see echoes of this, thinking in everything from World War II pillbox designs to the suspended firing positions of urban fortifications. Perhaps the most poetic twist is how hoardings turned the siege engineers' own tools against them. Attackers who spent weeks constructing battering rams or siege towers suddenly found their work vulnerable to attacks from directly above, where their engines' roofs were thinnest. This forced innovations like mobile roofs with steeply pitched tops, early attempts at sloped armor, and siege towers with retractable rams that could strike while mostly sheltered. The dance between hoarding and countermeasure became a microcosm of medieval warfare's evolving nature, where every solution birthed new challenges. Today, when we see construction cranes or fire escapes clinging to buildings, we're glimpsing the distant descendants of a medieval idea that proved sometimes the best defense is reaching out to meet the threat before it reaches you. The arbalest didn't just improve on the crossbow, it redefined what portable firepower could achieve in the medieval world. Imagine a weapon so powerful its steel-reinforced bow required a crank to draw, launching bolts capable of piercing a knight's breastplate at distances that would make envious. This was no incremental upgrade. It was a quantum leap in mechanical warfare, combining the precision of engineering with raw destructive force. Historical records from the siege of in 1204 describe French defenders picking off English knights through arrow slits, shots impossible for traditional bows, where the arbalest's flat trajectory and iron-tipped quarrels found gaps other projectiles couldn't exploit. What set the arbalest apart was its ruthless efficiency. The steel prod, often laminated for flexibility under immense tension, could store twice the energy of a wooden crossbow. Its windlass mechanism turned the grueling task of reloading into a systematic process. One soldier could crank while another aimed, maintaining a steady rate of fire. But the real genius lay in its versatility. Unlike trebuchets fixed to siege positions, arbalests could be hauled up siege ladders or mounted on castle ramparts, their compact size belying their punch. At the Battle of in 1396, Hungarian defenders used camouflaged arbalest positions to devastate Ottoman charges, their bolts punching through shields and armor alike with chilling consistency. The psychological impact was as calculated as its mechanics. The distinctive twang of its release carried farther than conventional crossbows, followed by a telltale whistle as the quarrel cut through air, a sound that became synonymous with imminent, inescapable death. Chronicles mention besiegers timing their advances to the rhythm of arbalest reloads, knowing the brief window between shots was their only chance to move safely. Some commanders even ordered blacksmiths to create bolts with hollowed shafts that produced a haunting shriek in flight, turning each shot into a terror weapon. Yet the arbalest's legacy extends beyond its battlefield dominance. Its precision engineering influenced everything from clockwork mechanisms to early firearm designs. The same ratcheting systems used to draw its steel bow later appeared in Renaissance-era cranes and bridge-building equipment. Modern tests with reconstructed models show its bolts could penetrate 3 inches of oak at 70 yards, a level of armor-defeating performance unmatched until the advent of rifled muskets. So while it faded from prominence as gunpowder spread, the arbalest stands as a testament to medieval innovation at its most brutally elegant, a reminder that sometimes progress doesn't just advance the art of war, but perfects it. The rondel dagger wasn't just a backup weapon. It was the medieval equivalent of a surgeon's scalpel, designed for one chilling purpose: to find the vulnerabilities even the finest armor couldn't hide. Picture the final moments of a knightly duel, 2 combatants locked in a desperate grapple, their great swords useless at this range. That's when the dagger emerged, its needle-like point seeking the gaps at the armpits, the vision slits of a visor, or the thin mail protecting the back of the knee. Historical accounts from tournaments describe fatal wounds delivered with less than 2 inches of penetration, a stark reminder that in close combat, precision often trumped raw power. What set the rondel apart was its ruthless specialization. Unlike decorative daggers with ornate hilts, this weapon stripped away all pretense. Its namesake rondel discs at the base of the grip ensured a soldier's hand wouldn't slip during a thrust, even when slick with blood or sweat. The triangular or diamond-shaped blade had no cutting edge, just a rigid spine tapering to a point capable of punching through rings or sliding between overlapping plates. Manuscript illustrations from the 100 Years, war show knights using rondels and grappling techniques, their free hand gripping an opponent's wrist, while the dagger sought the weak points modern anatomists confirm contain major arteries. The psychological dimension was just as calculated. Chronicles from the battle describe English men-at-arms pulling French knights into the mud, already exhausted by their own armor's weight, before finishing them with dagger thrusts through eye slits or gorget gaps. This wasn't just brutality. It was systematic exploitation of armor's inevitable trade-offs. Even the most comprehensive plate harness required articulation points, and the rondel turned those necessities into fatal liabilities. Some surviving examples feature hollow ground blades designed to minimize friction during withdrawal, allowing rapid follow-up strikes, proof that medieval smiths understood the value of seconds in life-or-death struggles. Yet the rondel's legacy extends beyond its lethality. Its design influenced everything from Renaissance-era stilettos to modern tactical knives, where rigidity and piercing capability remain paramount. Museum tests demonstrate that a properly angled thrust requires just 7 pounds of pressure to penetrate mail, less force than opening a stubborn jar. This efficiency made it a favorite not just of knights, but of assassins and bodyguards who needed. The same qualities that let a rondel slip between armor plates also made it easy to hide in a sleeve or boot, a duality that speaks to medieval warfare's unvarnished pragmatism. Perhaps the most telling testament to its effectiveness comes from the countermeasures it inspired. Armorers began adding interior mail, doublers, to protect articulation points, while helmets evolved deeper visors with eye slits. The arms race between protection and penetration reached its peak with the development of locking gauntlets, articulated metal gloves that could clamp onto an opponent's dagger wrist mid-thrust. In the end, the rondel dagger embodies a timeless truth about conflict. No defense is perfect, and the most decisive blows often come from recognizing the gaps others overlook. From the mud-choked battlefields of the Middle Ages to the close-quarters combat training of modern special forces, this unassuming weapon taught a lesson that still resonates. When distance collapses and chaos reigns, sometimes the smallest tool delivers the most final solution. The crow's beak didn't just wound, it dismantled, turning the knight's proud armor into a puzzle of vulnerabilities waiting to be apart. Picture this curved spike, its tip hardened to a needle's point, mounted opposite a hammerhead or axe blade on a sturdy shaft. This was no weapon of honor. It was a can opener for the battlefield, designed to peel back plate steel like the lid of a tin. Historical combat manuals from the 15th century depict gruesome techniques, hooks wrenching visors upward to expose the face, followed by a swift downward plunge into the now unprotected eye socket. At the Battle of Nancy in 1477, Swiss mercenaries used crows' beaks to systematically dismantle Charles the Bold's armored cavalry. Their methodical strikes, transforming gleaming suits of plate into death traps their wearers couldn't escape. What made this weapon so terrifying was its surgical precision. Unlike maces that relied on brute concussive force, the crow's beak exploited physics with chilling efficiency. The hooked tip concentrated energy into a minuscule contact point, allowing even a moderately strong fighter to puncture steel at weak spots like helmet hinges or the thin plating over joints. Some variants featured a slight inward curve, enabling users to yank riders from saddles by snagging their breastplate edges, a tactic that turned the knight's own weight against him. Museum tests with replicas demonstrate how a well-placed strike could generate over 2,000 pounds of penetration force, enough to pierce millimeter-thick steel at critical angles. But the crow's beak's true genius lay in its duality. The same tool that cracked armor could also serve as a climbing aid during sieges, its hook gripping castle masonry like a mountaineer's pick. Versions with elongated spikes doubled as makeshift levers to pry open barred doors or overturn enemy. This utilitarian flexibility made it a favorite of professional soldiers like the German, who valued weapons that could adapt to the unpredictable chaos of Renaissance battlefields. The psychological impact was equally calculated. Chronicles describe the distinctive screech of metal on metal as crows' beaks scraped across armor, a sound that sent shivers through even veteran knights. Defensive manuals began including entire chapters on beak defense, advising warriors to tuck their chins and hunch to protect vulnerable neck seals. Armorers responded with innovations like sliding rivets and reinforced visor springs, but the arms race only escalated. By the late 15th century, some Italian workshops produced helmets with smooth, rounded surfaces specifically designed to deflect hooks, an early example of anti-weapon shaping that foreshadowed modern tank armor. Yet perhaps the crow's beak's most enduring legacy is what it reveals about medieval combat's unflinching realism. In an era often romanticized for chivalric ideals, this weapon laid bare the brutal truth. Warfare rewarded those who solved problems with ruthless efficiency. Today, its DNA lives on in breaching tools used by special forces and firefighting equipment designed for forced entry, proof that the most effective designs transcend their original violence to become instruments of salvation. From the mud-choked fields of medieval Europe to the high-stakes rescues of modern emergency crews, the crow's beak teaches a timeless lesson. Sometimes, the difference between life and death hinges not on strength alone, but on the right tool in the right hands. The Hussite wagon fort didn't just defend, it revolutionized warfare by turning weakness into unbreakable strength. Picture a circle of reinforced farm carts, their sides fitted with thick wooden planks and loopholes, bristling with handguns, crossbows, and even small cannons. This was the ultimate underdog innovation, a ragtag army of Czech peasants and reformers, outnumbered and outmatched by the Holy Roman Empire's armored knights, who refused to play by the established rules of battle. Instead of meeting cavalry charges head-on, they transformed their supply wagons into mobile castles, creating instant fortresses wherever they stopped. Historical accounts from the Hussite Wars describe these formations resisting attack after attack, their crews firing through precisely angled gaps, while enemy knights floundered in the deadly no-man's land between wheels. What made the wagon fort so devastating was its adaptability. Each cart could be chained to its neighbors, forming a continuous wall with overlapping fields of fire. The space between wheels became kill zones where attackers, funneled into narrow gaps, faced a storm of projectiles from multiple angles. Some wagons carried like shields that could be lowered to create firing platforms, while others housed grenade throwers or early flamethrowers fueled by tar and gunpowder. At the Battle of in 1420, a handful of Hussite wagons held off 2,000 knights by anchoring themselves on a dike, using the terrain to force their enemies into a boggy killing ground. The mud-choked field became a graveyard of armored horses and drowning men, proof that brains could triumph over brute force. The psychological impact was as calculated as the engineering. The sight of these makeshift forts, often painted with religious symbols and slogans, struck fear into traditionally trained armies. Knights raised on chivalric combat found their every tactic neutralized. Charges broke against the wagon walls. Sieges were pointless against an enemy that could pack up and move overnight. And even psychological warfare backfired when Hussites sang hymns louder than the enemy's battle cries. Chroniclers wrote of imperial troops deserting at the mere rumor of approaching wagon forts, their morale shattered by the impossibility of victory against an enemy that refused to fight conventionally. Yet the wagon fort's true legacy lies in its democratic ingenuity. Unlike castles that took decades to build or cannons that required royal treasuries to fund, these were weapons of necessity, crafted from whatever materials lay at hand. Farmers adapted plow axles to support heavier armor, blacksmiths repurposed barrel hoops into gun ports, and housewives stitched thick felt curtains to dampen enemy arrows. This wasn't just tactical brilliance. It was a decentralized innovation, where every participant contributed to the collective defense. Modern military historians see echoes of their principles in everything from World War II tank tactics to protest movements that use improvised barriers. Perhaps most remarkably, the Hussite wagons forced a reckoning with medieval warfare's class divide. Peasants who'd once been seen as expendable cannon fodder proved they could outthink and outfight the aristocracy. Their success sparked panic among Europe's rulers, who rushed to adapt their own armies or risk losing control. In the end, the wagon fort stands as a testament to a timeless truth. When the powerless stop playing by the rules written to keep them down, even the mightiest empires must either adapt or fall. From the fields of Bohemia to the playbooks of modern guerrilla warfare, its lesson endures. Innovation isn't just about technology, but about daring to see the battlefield differently. Greek fire wasn't just a weapon. It was a nightmare made liquid, an alchemical horror that every law of medieval warfare. Picture Byzantine warships surrounded by enemy fleets, seemingly doomed, when suddenly jets of flame erupted from their prows, fire that clung to wood and flesh alike, that danced across waves as if the sea itself had turned to fuel. This wasn't ordinary fire. It was a substance so terrifying that Arab chroniclers called it liquid sunlight, while crusaders whispered it was stolen from the bowels of hell. The exact recipe remains lost to history, but its effects were seared into the memories of those who witnessed it. At the siege of Constantinople in 678, Arab sailors leaped into flaming waters rather than face the agony of Greek fire's unquenchable embrace, their screams echoing across the Golden Horn as the substance burned even beneath the surface. What set Greek fire apart was its impossible chemistry. Modern reconstructions suggest a volatile mix of naphtha, quicklime, and possibly saltpeter, ingredients that created a sticky, self-oxidizing inferno. The Byzantines pumped it through pressurized bronze tubes called siphons, creating flamethrower-like jets that could arc over 30 yards. But the real horror lay in its behavior. Unlike ordinary flames extinguished by water, Greek fire ignited upon contact with moisture, turning desperate attempts to douse it into fatal mistakes. Naval battles became exercises in terror, where a single well-placed burst could transform an enemy vessel into a floating funeral pyre within minutes. The psychological warfare was as calculated as the chemistry. Byzantine commanders often deployed Greek fire at dusk, its eerie green-tinged flames cutting through twilight to spectacular effect. Some accounts describe ships rigged with reflectors to amplify the fire's glow, creating the illusion of demonic intervention. The mere sight of the distinctive siphons, often shaped like roaring dragons or gaping serpent mouths, could trigger panic. During the siege of Constantinople in 941, Prince Fleet reportedly broke formation and fled at the first glimpse of the Byzantine fire ships, their oarsmen rowing backward in superstitious terror. Yet Greek fire's greatest legacy may be the mystery surrounding it. The Byzantines guarded its secrets with obsessive secrecy, its production divided among different artisans who knew only fragments of the formula. Emperors decreed death for anyone revealing its components to foreigners, while naval crews were sworn to silence under threat of excommunication. When Constantinople finally fell to the Ottomans in 1453, the secret may have died with the last Byzantine chemists, an ironic twist for a weapon that once made the empire nearly invincible. Modern scientists still debate its composition, with theories ranging from petroleum distillates to magnesium-enhanced compounds, but no replica has fully matched ancient descriptions of its water-igniting persistence. The weapon's influence extended far beyond its battlefield use. Its terrifying reputation shaped naval tactics for centuries, with admirals avoiding close formations long after Greek fire itself vanished from warfare. The concept of burning the sea entered military lore, inspiring later incendiary weapons from Venetian fire pots to World War II flamethrowers. Even today, the principles behind Greek fire, sticking flames, pressurized delivery systems, and psychological intimidation, echo in modern thermobaric weapons and non-lethal riot control agents. Perhaps the most chilling lesson of Greek fire lies in its deliberate obscurity. In an age when most military innovations spread rapidly, the Byzantines proved some knowledge truly is more dangerous shared than kept. Their vanished formula stands as a testament to humanity's paradoxical relationship with invention. The same ingenuity that creates tools of survival can birth horrors best left buried by time. From the charred timbers of medieval naval battles to the ethical debates surrounding modern weapons of mass destruction, Greek fire's ghost lingers, a flickering reminder that progress and peril often share the same flame. Nothing shattered an attacker's confidence like the sudden realization they'd stepped into a killing box. Murder holes transformed castle architecture into a three-dimensional chessboard, where every corridor and gateway hid the potential for instant, inescapable death from above. These unassuming openings, often no larger than a dinner plate, turned the very act of advancing into a lethal gamble. Picture armored knights huddled in a narrow passage, their progress slowed by the press of bodies, when suddenly the ceiling above them came alive. Rocks the size of grapefruits rained down, crushing helmets and shoulders. Arrows hissed through vertical slits at point-blank range, finding gaps in armor with terrifying precision. And then there were the liquids, boiling water, heated sand that seeped into joints and seams, or worst of all, quicklime that reacted violently with moisture, burning through flesh and leather alike. The screams echoing through those stone corridors weren't just from pain. They were the sound of men realizing they'd become prey in a carefully designed hunting ground. What made murder holes so devastating was their psychological precision. Unlike towering walls or imposing gatehouses that announced their threat openly, these death traps remained invisible until the critical moment. Defenders could wait silently above, choosing exactly when to unleash havoc. Chronicles from the siege of in 1266 describe English royalists losing entire squads to murder hole ambushes, their advance stalling as survivors tripped over the writhing bodies of comrades scalded by cascading oil. The hole's placement was no accident. Strategically positioned above choke points like spiral staircases or gate passages, where attackers had no room to dodge or raise shields effectively. Some castles took the concept further with double-stage, murder holes, where initial volleys of arrows would force intruders to raise their shields overhead, only for defenders to then pour molten lead or quicklime onto their now exposed legs and feet. The engineering behind these nightmarish features reveals medieval minds at their most ruthlessly inventive. The holes themselves were often flared inward, making it nearly impossible for attackers to shoot arrows upward in retaliation. Many featured hinged or sliding covers that allowed defenders to seal them between attacks, preventing clever foes from tossing torches or grenades back through. At Chevaliers, the Crusader stronghold in Syria, murder holes lined entire vaulted ceilings, their patterns designed to create overlapping kill zones where no corner offered safety. But perhaps the most chilling detail lies in the small ledges often carved beneath these openings, not decorative flourishes, but makeshift shelves where defenders could pre-position projectiles for rapid, relentless bombardment. Yet murder holes weren't just about inflicting damage. They reshaped the entire psychology of siege warfare. The mere knowledge of their existence forced attackers to move with paralyzing caution, their eyes constantly flickering upward rather than focusing on forward progress. Some besieging armies resorted to holding shields overhead in tortuous, tortoise formations, slowing their advance to a crawl while exhaustion set in. Others tried covering their advance with makeshift roofs, only to find defenders dropping flaming brands that turned these shelters into ovens. The psychological toll was immense. Chronicles describe veteran soldiers freezing at thresholds, their nerve broken by the unseen threat above. In France, the sight of murder holes lining the entrance corridor reportedly caused entire mercenary companies to demand triple pay before advancing, proof that sometimes the fear of death could be more valuable than death itself. The legacy of these architectural predators extends far beyond medieval warfare. Modern prison designs incorporate overhead surveillance points that subconsciously echo murder hole principles, creating spaces where inmates feel constantly observed. Military bunkers still use vertically positioned firing ports for enfilading fire, while riot control tactics employ elevated positions to drop non-lethal deterrents. Even video game-level design draws from this ancient concept, using constrained spaces and unseen threats to shape player behavior. The murder hole's true innovation wasn't the violence it delivered, but the revelation that control of three-dimensional space could be more decisive than raw numbers or strength. From the dark passages of medieval castles to the asymmetric battlefields of today, one lesson endures. Sometimes, the most dangerous threats aren't those you face eye-to-eye, but the ones waiting patiently above, unseen until it's too late. The tabard wasn't just a knight's fashion statement. It was a stroke of battlefield genius, transforming chaos into order with nothing more than colored cloth. Picture the muddled frenzy of a medieval melee, where armored warriors became indistinguishable beneath layers of dirt and dents. Now imagine a knight's vibrant heraldry blazing across his sleeveless surcoat, his identity clear as daylight even through the carnage. This was no aristocratic vanity project. It was early military identification taken to an art form. At the Battle of, where fog and rain turned the field into a nightmarish tangle, Commanders relied on these walking banners to coordinate charges and avoid cutting down their own allies. Medieval warfare's answer to modern-day IFF systems. What made the tabard revolutionary was its seamless blend of function and symbolism. Worn over armor, its loose design allowed freedom of movement while displaying bold geometric patterns or mythical beasts unique to each noble house. The science behind these designs was surprisingly sophisticated. Contrasting colors like argent and gules, silver and red, ensured visibility at distance, while intricate divisions of the field created distinct silhouettes recognizable even in peripheral vision. Chronicles from the 100 Years' War describe archers loosing volleys at the Black Bull of York, or the Golden Lions of Aquitaine, proving these visual cues could direct entire armies as effectively as shouted orders. But the tabard's true brilliance lay in its psychological impact. A knight's heraldry wasn't just identification, it was reputation made visible. The sight of certain crests charging forward could demoralize enemies who knew their fearsome histories. At the siege of Ark's distinctive white tabard emblazoned with fleur-de-lis became a rallying point, its purity contrasting starkly with the grime of war. Conversely, some commanders exploited this recognition factor through deception. During the Wars of the Roses, false tabards mimicking enemy colors allowed surprise attacks, an early form of psychological warfare that forced stricter heraldic regulations. The tabard's legacy extends far beyond medieval battlefields. Its principles live on in modern military insignia, sports team uniforms, and even corporate branding, all descendants of that simple idea: visual identity is power. Museums preserve tabards with meticulous heraldic accuracy, recognizing them not as mere costumes, but as the original battlefield UX, proving that sometimes the most effective inventions aren't those that deal death, but those that bring clarity to chaos. From the embroidered surcoats of crusaders to the digital friend or foe systems of modern jets, the tabard's lesson endures. In war and beyond, knowing who stands beside you can be as crucial as knowing who stands against you. For centuries, gunpowder was as unpredictable as the weather, a volatile mix that could fizzle weakly or explode catastrophically with no warning. Then came the quiet revolution of corning, a process so simple yet transformative that it turned erratic black powder into the reliable engine of warfare's future. Picture medieval alchemists painstakingly sieving dampened gunpowder into tiny, uniform grains, each granule a miniature masterpiece of chemical consistency. This wasn't just a refinement, it was a revelation. Where earlier powder burned unevenly due to clumping, corned gunpowder ignited layer by layer like dominoes falling in perfect sequence, unleashing a controlled fury that could be timed, aimed, and trusted. The magic lay in the physics of surface area. Granules exposed more powder to oxygen, ensuring complete combustion, while their uniform size eliminated the erratic burn rates that plagued early cannons. Chronicles from the Hussite Wars describe gunners marveling at the difference. Where once they'd needed to triple charges to guarantee ignition, corned powder delivered the same force with mathematical precision. At the siege of in 1429, French artillerymen leveraged this consistency to place shot after shot into the same weakened section of English walls, a feat impossible with the old serpentine powder that varied from batch to batch. But Corning's true genius was its ripple effect. Reliable powder meant artillery could be standardized, culverins, bombards, and no longer needed trial-and-error adjustments for each firing. Gunners became mathematicians, calculating trajectories based on fixed explosive yields rather than praying to saints for a clean ignition. This birthed the science of ballistics, where range and impact could be predicted rather than guessed. Venetian arsenals began grading powder by grain size, fine for pistols, coarse for siege guns, creating the world's first ammunition classification system. The psychological shift was equally profound. Soldiers who'd once feared their own weapons more than the enemy's now trusted them implicitly. The deafening, synchronized volleys of corned powder musketry at the Battle of in 1525 didn't just kill. They demonstrated a terrifying new order on the battlefield, where disciplined rows could unleash hell with factory-like precision. Even the smoke changed, burning cleaner and dissipating faster, no longer blinding gunners after each shot. Yet Corning's legacy extends beyond destruction. The same principles of granulation revolutionized mining, with controlled blasts replacing dangerous pickaxe work. Fireworks became breathtaking spectacles rather than haphazard explosions, their choreographed beauty a direct descendant of medieval powder mills. Today, from rocket propellants to pharmaceutical tablets, we still live in a world shaped by that pivotal realization that sometimes the smallest particles hold the power to change history. The difference between chaos and progress, it turns out, can be as simple as a grain of sand. A knight's sword might win a battle, but it was the humble horseshoe that won the war, one ironclad hoof at a time. Picture the European countryside in early autumn, roads turned to mud by relentless rain, fields littered with sharp flints that could lame an unprotected horse in miles. Without this unassuming crescent of forged metal, the thunderous cavalry charges that defined medieval warfare would have been reduced to a limping farce. The horseshoe didn't just protect hooves, it transformed the very geography of conflict, turning impassable terrain into highways for conquest. Chronicles from Charlemagne's campaigns reveal how his armored riders covered staggering distances, sometimes 30 miles a day, thanks to smiths who traveled with the army, resetting shoes as needed. While opponents struggled through rocky passes with hobbled mounts, Frankish knights arrived fresh for battle, their steeds' hooves intact and ready to trample anything in their path. What made the horseshoe revolutionary wasn't its complexity, but its profound understanding of biomechanics. A shod hoof could absorb the shock of a full gallop charge on hard ground without splitting, while the raised rim, called the calque, provided traction in mud or snow. Blacksmiths tailored shoes to conditions, broader designs for marshy terrain, lighter versions for speed, even specialized winter shoes with sharpened edges that functioned like equestrian crampons. At the Battle of the Ice in 1242, Teutonic knights learned this lesson brutally when their unshod horses slipped helplessly on frozen lake, while Alexander's Mongol-inspired cavalry, all shod with spiked shoes, maneuvered with lethal precision. The logistical ripple effects were staggering. Horseshoes extended the of war horses from a few grueling seasons to years of service, making the exorbitant cost of breeding and training destriers a viable investment. Supply trains no longer needed to carry spare horses, just a mobile forge and a skilled smith. Some armies even developed folding shoes for emergency repairs, the medieval equivalent of a field medic's kit. The Doomsday Book records over 100,000 horseshoes stockpiled for William the Conqueror's campaigns. Proving medieval warlords understood this was no minor accessory, but the linchpin of mobile warfare. Yet the horseshoe's legacy extends far beyond the battlefield. Its adoption spurred advancements in metallurgy, as smiths experimented with alloys that could withstand constant abrasion. The need for standardized sizes led to early measurement systems, with regional shoe gauges becoming trade commodities. Even the rise of toll roads traces back to horseshoes. Cobbled surfaces lasted longer when protected by iron, so towns invested in paving where shoed traffic was heaviest. Today, from the cleats on football boots to the treads of all-terrain vehicles, we still live in a world shaped by that simple realization. Victory doesn't just go to the strong or the brave, but to those who can keep moving when others grind to a halt. Perhaps the most poetic twist is how this invention blurred social lines. A lord's charger and a peasant's plow horse wore identical shoes, both reliant on the same blacksmith skill. In an era defined by hierarchy, the horseshoe became a rare democratizing force, proof that some solutions transcend class, because mud and gravity show no favoritism. So the next time you see a modern delivery van speeding down a highway, remember, its ancestor wasn't a chariot or a carriage, but a sweat-streaked warhorse galloping confidently over terrain that would have stopped it cold, all because someone once thought to nail iron to its feet. The drawbridge didn't just span moats. It played psychological games with attackers, dangling access like a carrot before snatching it away. Imagine an invading army surging toward a castle gate, only for the massive wooden platform to creak upward at the last second, leaving the lead troops stumbling into a water-filled ditch while arrows rained down from above. This wasn't just a bridge. It was a theatrical prop in a deadly performance, where the castle always held the starring role. The genius lay in its dual nature, a welcoming pathway one moment, an impassable barrier the next. Chronicles from the Siege of Rochester in 1215 describe King John's fury when his siege towers rolled forward, only for the defenders to raise the drawbridge with his own sappers, still trapped on the wrong side, turning a planned assault into a slaughterhouse. What set the drawbridge apart was its seamless integration with other defenses. Paired with a moat, it created a liquid no-man's land that forced attackers into predictable choke points. The moment the bridge rose, any enemy caught in the gatehouse became fish in a barrel, exposed to murder holes above and flanking arrow loops to the sides. But the real brilliance emerged in counterattacks. A well-timed lowering could unleash a garrison's cavalry like a cork from a bottle, their charge gaining momentum across the firm wooden surface before smashing into disorganized besiegers. At the castle of in 1205, defenders used this tactic to obliterate a drunken mercenary camp, their drawbridge dropping silently under moonlight before knights thundered across to torch supplies and vanish before the enemy could rally. Engineering these moving fortresses required medieval ingenuity at its finest. The heaviest drawbridges used counterweights, often hidden in gatehouse chambers, to allow quick raising by just a few men. Some featured spiked beams mounted beneath that swung down to impale anyone clinging to the rising bridge. Others had deceptive designs, outer surfaces planked to look like part of the roadway until they pivoted vertically, revealing iron-reinforced undersides studded with nails to repel climbers. The castle of Caerphilly in Wales took it further with a double drawbridge system, where an outer bridge could be sacrificed to lure attackers into a killing zone before the inner ones sealed their fate. Yet the drawbridge's greatest power was psychological. Its mere presence forced besiegers to waste energy on feints and distractions, never knowing if an apparent weakness was genuine or a trap. The rhythmic clanking of its chains during routine exercises became a form of acoustic intimidation, reminding enemies that access was granted, not taken. Some lords even staged elaborate lowering ceremonies for ambassadors, drawing out the process to showcase the fortress's impenetrability. By the Renaissance, drawbridges had evolved into symbols of aristocratic control, their operation governed by rituals as strict as any courtly dance. The legacy of these wooden giants endures in surprising ways. Modern retractable bridges and even airport boarding ramps owe a conceptual debt to medieval gatekeepers who understood the power of controlled access. From the castle moats of Europe to the raised drawbridges of fantasy lore, one lesson remains. True security isn't just about keeping threats out. It's about deciding exactly when and how to let the world in. From the crossbow's democratization of warfare to the Trebuchet's earth-shaking power, these 32 inventions didn't just alter battles. They rewrote the rules of human conflict itself. What's truly astonishing isn't just their destructive potential, but how they reveal the medieval mind at its most brilliantly pragmatic. Each breakthrough, whether the Gambesson's layered protection or the Springle's mechanical precision, sprang from the same relentless drive to solve problems with whatever materials lay at hand. The same ingenuity that crafted illuminated manuscripts and soaring cathedrals also forged these instruments of war, proving innovation thrives even in darkness. Consider how deeply these technologies permeate our modern world. The Trebuchet's counterweight principles echo in construction cranes, while the Gambesson's shock absorption lives on in bulletproof vests. Hussite wagon forts anticipated modern mobile artillery units, and the psychological terror of Greek fire finds its parallel in today's flamethrowers. Even something as humble as the horseshoe reshaped economies, enabling trade networks that bound continents together. These weren't just tools for conquest. They were the birth pangs of engineering disciplines that would eventually take humanity to the moon. Yet perhaps their greatest legacy lies in the uncomfortable truth they reveal about progress itself. Necessity may be the mother of invention, but warfare has always been its most demanding midwife. The same relentless problem-solving that gave us plate armor also gave us precision clocks. The mathematics behind the Longbow's trajectory calculations later guided Renaissance astronomers. It's a paradox that still resonates. Our darkest impulses often accelerate our advancements. As you scroll past medieval armor in museums or spot castle silhouettes on distant hills, try to see beyond the romance and rust. These were once the smartphones and stealth bombers of their age, revolutionary technologies that transformed societies. The arbalest's crank mechanism foreshadowed industrial machinery, while the tabard's heraldic system evolved into modern corporate branding. Every era believes its tools are the pinnacle of sophistication, only for future generations to marvel at their simplicity. So the next time you click like on a video or adjust your ergonomic office chair, remember, You're participating in a chain of innovation that stretches back to some nameless blacksmith hammering out the first stirrup. History isn't just about dates and dead kings. It's the story of how we keep reshaping the world, one desperate, brilliant idea at a time. If this journey through medieval ingenuity sparked your curiosity, why not dive deeper? Share which invention amazed you most in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more adventures where history and technology collide. The past isn't just a foreign country, it's the workshop where our